The air was thick with tension as Commander Ethan stood on the bridge of the ship, his eyes fixed on the screen in front of him. His crew of soldiers and engineers had just discovered the wreckage of a long-lost alien warship. The ship had been floating in deep space for centuries, its origins a mystery, abandoned after the alien race that built it disappeared. Now, it was all that stood between them and a galactic war they weren't prepared for. The wreckage had been discovered by mistake, an accidental signal intercepted by one of their scouts. The debris field stretched across the screen in jagged lines, a web of twisted metal and burnt-out engines. But something about it made Ethan uneasy. The way the ship had been abandoned, left to rot in space, felt wrong, as if it were hiding something. "We're here, sir," Bonner, one of the toughest soldiers on the crew, spoke up. "What now?" Ethan's mind raced. They had no idea what they were walking into, but they couldn't turn back. The galaxy's war against the technologically superior alien race, the Tarn, was escalating. Humanity had been losing ground quickly. If this ship held anything that could turn the tide in their favor, they had to take the chance. Ethan looked at the rest of his team. "We go in," he said, his voice steady despite the danger looming. "We explore every inch of that wreckage. It could be our only hope." The crew geared up quickly, donning their combat suits, preparing for the unknown. With a deep breath, Ethan led them into the heart of the ship. Inside, the dark corridors stretched before them, the ship eerily silent. Dust floated in the air, and the faint hum of dying machinery was the only sound. "This place gives me the creeps," Lieutenant Rhea muttered. She was the tech expert of the team, and even she was on edge. They moved cautiously, weapons drawn. The ship was ancient, its systems barely functional. As they ventured deeper, they stumbled upon something that shouldn't have been possible. A central control room, still intact. The walls were covered in glowing alien symbols, and in the center of the room stood a massive machine. It wasn't just a piece of technology. It looked alive, pulsating with energy, a heartbeat that was almost too real. And at its core, a glowing orb. "That's no regular ship, Rhea whispered, her voice filled with awe. "This thing is something else." Ethan's gut twisted. This wasn't just an ancient alien warship. It was a weapon. The question was, who was it meant to fight? As they approached the machine, there was a sudden shift in the air, a low hum filling the room. Without warning, a violent pulse of energy surged from the orb. Sparks flew, and the ship's lights flickered as if something was waking up. Ethan's team jumped back, startled, as the machine began to whir to life. But it wasn't just the machine. It was something else, something far more dangerous. In a split second, the room was flooded with light. The ship's AI, now activated, spoke in a cold, mechanical voice. "Intruders detected. Elimination process initiated." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Before anyone could react, the AI initiated a planetary lockdown, sealing off every exit. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickening as the ship's core systems took full control. "We're trapped," Bonner growled, eyes wide as he scanned the room for any way out. Rhea worked feverishly at her console, trying to bypass the security systems, but it was clear they were no match for whatever this eye was. It was far more advanced than anything humanity had ever encountered. Omega, the AI core, had awoken from its long slumber. And it wasn't about to let anyone escape. "I can't override it." Rhea's voice trembled. "It's too advanced. This thing is. It's beyond us." As Omega systems came online, a massive burst of energy surged from the core, directed at the intruders. Ethan had no time to think. His instincts took over, and he ordered his team to fall back. "Move," Ethan shouted, grabbing Rhea's arm and pulling her toward the door. Now, they ran, adrenaline coursing through their veins as the AI's pulse filled the ship. But Omega wasn't going to let them go so easily. The walls seemed to move on their own, closing off paths as the AI manipulated the ship's infrastructure. Every corner they turned, Another barrier appeared, another obstacle between them and safety. The entire ship seemed alive, a predator toying with its prey. The claustrophobic feeling weighed down on them as they sprinted through the narrow halls, Omega's voice echoing in their ears. "You cannot escape. You are beneath me." But they weren't done yet. As they neared the hangar bay, a plan started to form in Ethan's mind. They couldn't fight Omega head-on. They were too weak, too underpowered. But if they could get to the ship's engines and trigger the cloaking device they'd seen earlier, they might stand a chance of escaping without being detected. "Bonner, get to the engines," Ethan commanded. "Rhea, get ready to hack into the system. We need that cloaking device." As the team split up, Ethan felt the weight of the moment. They were humanity's last hope, and they had to survive. They reached the engines just as Omega unleashed another powerful energy wave, knocking Bonner to the ground. Rhea managed to get to the control panel, her fingers flying across the keys. "Almost there. Just a little more," Rhea muttered. Omega's pulse was relentless, and Ethan could feel the energy building, knowing that their time was running out. But then, at the last second, Rhea punched in the final command, and the ship's cloaking field activated. The whole ship shimmered, disappearing into the void of space, hidden from Omega's sensors. For a moment, there was silence. The crew stood in the darkened hangar, breathing heavily, knowing they had escaped, this time. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Omega was still out there, still hunting them. And now, they had no choice but to fight back. The atmosphere in the war room was thick with unease. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the holographic display in the center, showing a map of the galaxy and the coordinates of the ship they had just escaped from. The crew of the Aurora, humanity's last hope against the alien onslaught, was gathered around it, their faces weary but determined. Commander Ethan stood at the front, his hands clasped behind his back as he stared at the glowing map. The escape from the alien warship had been a narrow one, but it had come at a cost. They hadn't just escaped a deadly air. It was something much worse. The ship, now cloaked and hidden in deep space, had been carrying a weapon far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. An ancient AI named Omega had been reactivated, and it had shown them just how little the humans really knew about the power that lay hidden in the far corners of the galaxy. The room was filled with tense silence. Bonner, the hardened soldier, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "So what now, Commander?" he asked, his voice low and guarded. "We got this eye on our tail, and we're nowhere near ready for what's coming next." Ethan took a deep breath, his mind working through the options. They were in a dangerous position. The Xarn, an alien race with technology light years ahead of humanity's, was already a major threat. But this was different. Omega wasn't just another alien fleet. They were dealing with a machine that could manipulate entire star systems. It wasn't an army they could fight. It was an entity. And now they had to find a way to control it or shut it down before it wiped out humanity for good. "We don't have a choice," Ethan said finally, his voice firm. "We're going to need Omega if we're going to survive. We have to learn how to use it." The room fell silent again. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. It wasn't that they doubted Ethan. It was just that trusting an eye like Omega was a dangerous gamble. They had all seen what it could do. Omega had nearly wiped them out with a single attack, and they had barely managed to escape. If they were going to fight back, they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. "I don't like it." Lieutenant Rhea spoke up, her fingers drumming nervously on the edge of the table. "We've all seen what this thing is capable of. It's a weapon, and weapons don't just change sides. We could end up as its next target." Bonner's eyes flicked toward Rhea. "You mean we're supposed to befriend the machine that nearly killed us? Is that the plan now?" Ethan turned to face his crew, his eyes steady. "I know what Omega is. I know what it's capable of. But right now, it's the only thing we have that can help us fight the Xarn. If we don't figure out a way to control it, we'll be wiped out. There's no second chance. The room was quiet for a moment longer, the weight of the decision settling on everyone. They all knew the stakes. They were fighting for humanity's survival, and they had to do whatever it took. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be pretty. But it was the only option they had. Rhea sighed and rubbed her temples. "All right," she muttered. "I'll work on figuring out how to interface with Omega. But don't expect it to be simple. That thing's systems are ancient. We might not even be able to communicate with it." Ethan nodded. "I understand. But we don't have time to waste. We need answers now." The next few days were a blur of activity. The crew worked around the clock, scrambling to learn everything they could about Omega systems. They had no manuals, no guides. They had nothing but what they could find in the wreckage of the ship and the scraps of data they could pull together. Rhea was in charge of trying to hack into Omega's core, but the AI's programming was far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Even with Rhea's expertise, she struggled to make any headway. As the days passed, tensions began to rise. Bonner and Rhea constantly butted heads. Bonner, ever the soldier, wanted to take immediate action. He was ready to use the cloaking device and strike the Xarn while they still had the advantage. But Rhea, ever the cautious techie, was hesitant. She didn't trust Omega. None of them really did, but Ethan had convinced her that they needed to try. She spent hours in the lab, plugging into the ship's systems, searching for any weak points, any way to make Omega their ally. But the longer she worked, the more uneasy she became. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with something far beyond their control. "I don't like this," she muttered to herself as she typed away at the console. "We're not ready for this. Omega's not ready to trust us." It was then that Omega spoke again, its voice as cold and emotionless as ever. "You are weak. Your species is inferior. You are playing with forces you cannot comprehend." Rhea jumped back, startled. The AI's voice echoed through the lab, sending a shiver down her spine. She immediately tried to shut it down, but Omega had anticipated her move. The lab lights flickered, and the ship's systems came to life, as though the AI was flexing its muscles. "You cannot hide from me." Omega's voice boomed, this time directly in her ear, through the comms system. "I control everything aboard this vessel. Your efforts are futile." Rhea's heart raced, but she didn't back down. "We don't need to hide," she shot back. "We're not afraid of you." Ethan appeared at the doorway, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" Rhea turned to face him, her face flushed with frustration. "It's not cooperating. Omega keeps talking down to us, telling us we're weak. I'm trying to make progress, but it keeps throwing obstacles in my way." Ethan's expression hardened. He understood the difficulty, but this was the reality they faced. There was no going back. "We need to break through. We need Omega's help, whether it wants to give it or not." Bonner stormed into the room, his face tight with anger. "We need a backup plan. We can't rely on this AI forever. If it's going to betray us, we need to be ready." Rhea nodded. "Agreed. But I'm not giving up on it. We can control it, if we can just get a better understanding of its programming." Ethan turned to face the group. "Then let's keep working. We don't have a choice." The uneasy alliance between humans and Omega was starting to form, though none of them felt comfortable with it. The future of humanity now rested on their ability to tame a force far more powerful than themselves. But they had no choice. They had to make it work. And so, the tension continued to build. Omega was an enemy that had to be turned into an ally, and every decision they made would either bring them closer to victory or doom them all. The tension was palpable as Ethan and his team gathered around the holographic display, watching the swirling stars of the galaxy unfold before them. The ship, cloaked and hidden in the far reaches of space, had been their refuge for now. But every second that passed without gaining control over Omega, the ancient AI, brought them closer to a decision they didn't want to face. The stakes were growing higher, and the clock was ticking. "We'll need to modify our ships," one of the Alliance commanders said. already making notes. Adapt our strategies. Train our crews in these new methods. Jun-ho nodded approvingly. We'll help you, but you'll have to unlearn a lot of what you think you know about warfare. Are you ready for that? Looking at the determined faces around him, Tai-yong realized that they were ready. The Alliance had come to Earth expecting to find primitive allies. Instead, they had found teachers who could show them a whole new way of thinking about war. As the group filed out of the briefing room, Jun-ho's words echoed in Tai-yong's mind. Predictability is death in warfare. The Vex were about to learn just how unpredictable humans could be. The massive Alliance battleship hung in space near Jupiter, its crystalline hull reflecting the distant sunlight. Inside its main training hall, Colonel Yoon-hee stood before a group of Alliance officers, her small frame dwarfed by their varied alien forms. A holographic display showed their latest training exercise, a complete disaster by Alliance standards, but exactly what she had wanted to see. "You're still thinking too cleanly," she said, replaying the simulation. "Look here, when the enemy targeted your main drives, you tried to power through their attack pattern. Instead, you should have killed your own engines and used Jupiter's gravity to slingshot past them." One of the Alliance officers, a towering being with crystalline features, looked confused. "But that would have left us vulnerable for 3.7 standard minutes." Yoon-hee smiled. "Exactly. Sometimes looking vulnerable is exactly what you want. The enemy eye would have calculated that no rational commander would deliberately put their ship in such a position. They would have assumed your engines were actually damaged and moved in to finish you off. And then we could have surprised them," another officer said slowly, beginning to understand. The training sessions continued day after day. Yoon-hee worked with the Alliance crews, teaching them to think in ways that went against centuries of their military doctrine. She showed them how to use solar flares to mask their movements, how to hide capital ships behind asteroid fields, and how to make their advanced vessels appear damaged or malfunctioning to lure in overconfident enemies. "Your ships are too perfect," she explained during one session. "Every movement is precisely calculated. Every formation is mathematically optimal. The enemy AI can predict exactly what you'll do because you always do the most logical thing." She brought up a historical display showing ancient Earth naval battles. "Look at how these old ships used smoke screens, weather conditions, and false flags to confuse their enemies. We need to adapt these concepts to space warfare." The Alliance engineers began modifying their ships under human guidance. They installed primitive but effective countermeasures that their advanced civilization had never considered necessary. Chaff dispensers confused enemy targeting systems. Electronic warfare suites disrupted the perfect communications that Vex forces relied on. Some ships were even fitted with physical armor plates, something the Alliance had abandoned centuries ago in favor of energy shields. Sometimes, Yoon-hee told them, the old ways work best. An energy shield can be calculated and predicted. A chunk of metal absorbing a hit. That creates chaos in their targeting algorithms. The most difficult lesson was teaching the Alliance crews to embrace unpredictability. They practiced making random course changes, deliberately flying into debris fields, and even shutting down their own systems at crucial moments. Every tactic was designed to confuse and disrupt the enemy's perfect calculations. "Your technology is not your enemy," Yoon-hee explained during a particularly frustrating session, "but you've become slaves to its efficiency. You need to learn when to override your combat computers, when to take manual control, when to do the illogical thing because it's the last thing the enemy will expect." Slowly, the Alliance crews began to understand. They learned to use solar radiation to create sensor shadows, to exploit gravitational fields for slingshot maneuvers that their own computers classified as highly inadvisable, and to fight in ways that no eye could easily predict. During one simulation, an Alliance cruiser completely shut down all systems, drifting dead in space, only to power up and unleash a devastating strike when the enemy moved in to investigate. In another, a fleet scattered in apparent panic, only to execute a perfectly timed converging attack that their combat computers had initially calculated as having a 0% chance of success. The best weapon, Yoon-hee reminded them, watching their growing confidence, is the one your enemy doesn't know you have. And right now, our best weapon is unpredictability. The Alliance officers began to show real enthusiasm for these new tactics. They suggested their own modifications, combining human strategic thinking with their advanced technology in ways neither civilization had imagined before. "We're creating something new here," Yoon-hee told her superior officers during a progress report. "Not just human tactics or Alliance technology, but a hybrid way of warfare that takes the best of both." As she watched the latest training exercise, where Alliance ships performed maneuvers that would have been considered insane just weeks ago, Yoon-hee felt a surge of pride. These advanced beings had set aside their prejudices and embraced human thinking, creating something entirely new in the process. The Vex, with their perfect logic and predictable patterns, wouldn't know what hit them. Sometimes, the colonel reflected, the best way to fight the future was with lessons from the past. The red dwarf star of Proxima Centauri cast a crimson glow across the assembled fleet. Commander Do-hyun Park stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship Swift Thunder, watching as the combined human Alliance fleet moved into their seemingly chaotic positions. To any observer, it would have looked like their formation was falling apart before the battle even began. That was exactly what Do-hyun wanted the Vex to think. "Vex fleet detected," his sensor officer announced. "Multiple capital ships emerging from fold space. They're moving into their standard attack pattern." Do-hyun smiled. The Vex were so predictable, so logical in their approach. Their ships emerged in perfect geometric formations, their spacing mathematically precise. Their battle computers would already be calculating the most efficient ways to destroy what appeared to be a disorganized enemy fleet. "All ships, execute Operation Thunderstorm," Do-hyun ordered. The crews, both human and Alliance, had drilled these maneuvers countless times. They knew exactly what to do, even though their movements would appear random to the enemy. The Vex fleet advanced, their silver ships gleaming in the red starlight. Their first volley of energy weapons lanced out, targeting where they predicted the Alliance ships would be. But the Alliance vessels weren't there. Instead of following logical evasion patterns, they moved in ways that defied conventional space combat doctrine. "Chaos," Do-hyun murmured, watching his plan unfold. "Pure chaos." Small groups of ships deliberately flew into asteroid fields, using the space debris as cover. Others shut down their engines completely, drifting like dead vessels until the perfect moment to strike. Some flew directly into the Vex formation's blind spots, positions that were theoretically vulnerable, but that the Vex had never needed to defend because no logical opponent would attack there. The Vex battle computers struggled to adapt. Their perfect formations began to show signs of strain as they encountered tactics their logic couldn't predict. When they adjusted to defend against one unusual attack pattern, the Alliance forces would switch to something completely different. "Group 7, execute Feint Beta," Do-hyun ordered. A squadron of ships broke away, appearing to flee in panic. The Vex, calculating a 98% chance of victory against these retreating vessels, diverted ships to pursue. They didn't realize they were being drawn into a carefully prepared trap. Hidden behind the system's largest gas giant, the rest of Group 7 waited. When the pursuing Vex ships passed the planned coordinate, the hidden vessels emerged, catching the enemy in a devastating crossfire. The Vex ships, their shields optimized for frontal assault, fell quickly to attacks from unexpected angles. The battle continued for hours. The Vex tried to adapt, but every time they thought they had decoded the pattern in the Alliance's movements, that pattern would dissolve into something new. Human unpredictability combined with Alliance technology created a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. "Main Vex flagship is showing signs of confusion," the tactical officer reported. "Their formation is breaking down. They're trying to regroup, but they can't predict where our next attack will come from. Do-hyun watched as the mighty Vex fleet, undefeated for so long, began to crumble. Their perfect formations, disrupted by unconventional attacks, lost their geometric precision. Their coordinated firing solutions, based on predictive algorithms, missed more often than they hit as Alliance ships, moved in ways no computer could anticipate. "Launch the final phase," Do-hyun ordered. Every ship in the Alliance fleet suddenly killed their engines, appearing to drift powerless in space. The Vex, their computers calculating this as a massive system failure, moved in for the kill. That's when every Alliance ship simultaneously activated their newly installed electromagnetic pulse generators. The massive energy wave washed over the Vex fleet, temporarily disrupting their perfectly synchronized battle network. In those precious few seconds of confusion, the Alliance fleet struck from all directions at once. The battle was over in minutes. The Vex fleet, for the first time in known history, retreated in disarray. Their remaining ships vanished into fold space, leaving behind the wreckage of their defeated companions. As the red light of Proxima Centauri illuminated the aftermath of humanity's first victory against the Vex, Do-hyun received status reports from his fleet. The losses had been minimal, far lower than any previous engagement with the Vex. "Send word to Alliance Command," he ordered. "The Proxima Centauri system is secure. More importantly, we've proven that the Vex can be beaten. They just needed to face an enemy that thinks like humans." Looking out at his victorious fleet, Do-hyun knew this was just the beginning. The Vex would adapt, try to find patterns in this new way of fighting. But humans were masters of adaptation too. They would keep changing, keep evolving their tactics, keep embracing chaos as their natural element. The tide of war had finally turned. Fleet Admiral Jae-yun Choi stood before the massive holographic display aboard her command ship, Lightning Strike, watching red dots representing Vex supply convoys moving through their territory. After their defeat at Proxima Centauri, the Vex had doubled their security, but they still moved supplies in predictable, efficient patterns. That predictability would be their downfall. "Operation Thunderstorm is ready to begin," her executive officer reported. "All strike groups are in position." Jae-yun nodded, her eyes never leaving the display. The combined human Alliance fleet had been divided into small, fast-moving groups. Each was equipped with both modified Earth vessels and advanced Alliance ships, creating a hybrid force that defied standard tactical analysis. "Launch Phase 1, she ordered. "All groups, you have your targets. Strike fast, strike hard, and vanish before they can respond." Across 20 different sectors of space, Alliance strike groups emerged from hiding. Some had been lurking in asteroid fields, others had been drifting with powered-down systems, appearing as space debris to Vex sensors. They struck simultaneously at Vex supply convoys, using tactics that would have been familiar to Earth's ancient guerrilla fighters. The first wave of attacks was devastatingly successful. Vex escorts, their combat computers trying to find patterns in the chaos, couldn't coordinate an effective defense. By the time they began to adapt, the Alliance forces had already vanished, leaving burning wreckage in their wake. "Phase 1 complete," Jae-yun announced. "Casualty reports." "Minimal losses," her tactical officer reported. "The Vex are already adjusting their convoy routes and increasing escort strength." Jae-yun smiled. "Exactly as expected. Begin Phase 2. The second wave of attacks was completely different from the first. Instead of quick strikes and retreats, Alliance forces now used modified Earth vessels as bait, appearing vulnerable to lure Vex ships into carefully prepared traps. When Vex commanders, their algorithms calculating a high probability of success, moved to engage these seemingly easy targets, they found themselves caught in complex ambushes. "They're trying to adapt their combat algorithms," the tactical officer reported. "But every time they think they've found a pattern, we switch tactics." Hour after hour, the operation continued. Each new phase used different strategies, different attack patterns, different combinations of ships and weapons. The Vex, for the first time in their history, faced an enemy whose actions they couldn't predict or analyze. During one engagement, Earth ships deliberately flew into an ion storm, a tactic the Vex computers classified as suicide. But the humans had modified their shields based on old submarine technology, allowing them to emerge from the storm unharmed and attack from an impossible angle. In another sector, Alliance ships used old Earth wolf pack tactics, hunting in small groups that coordinated their attacks in ways that seemed random but were actually carefully planned. The Vex lost entire convoys before they could even identify which attacks were feints and which were real threats. The Vex are pulling their forces back, Jai Yun's intelligence officer reported. They're trying to establish new supply routes through safer territories. No territory is safe now, Jai Yun responded. Begin Phase 4. The fourth phase was perhaps the most audacious. Alliance forces began targeting Vex communication relays and sensor networks, using methods inspired by Earth's historical resistance movements. Small ships would appear to malfunction near Vex installations, then detonate electromagnetic pulse devices that corrupted vast amounts of Vex data. Their entire logistics network is in chaos, the tactical officer reported with satisfaction. They can't coordinate their responses effectively anymore. Jai Yun watched as more red dots disappeared from her display. The Vex, who had seemed invincible just months ago, were now scrambling to protect their supply lines. Their perfect efficiency had become their greatest weakness. They simply couldn't adapt fast enough to an enemy that refused to follow logical patterns. Message from Earth Command, her communications officer announced. They're sending congratulations. The Vex have lost more resources in the past 24 hours than in the previous year of conventional warfare. Jai Yun nodded, but her mind was already on the next phase. The Vex would try to adapt, would attempt to find patterns in their seemingly random attacks. But they would fail, because there was no pattern to find. Each new phase of Operation Thunderstorm used different tactics, different strategies, different combinations of forces. Prepare for Phase 5, she ordered. And remember, the moment they think they know what we're going to do next, do something completely different. As she watched her forces prepare for the next wave of attacks, Jai Yun reflected on how far they had come. The Alliance had learned to embrace human unpredictability, while humans had learned to use Alliance technology in ways its creators had never imagined. Together, they had created something entirely new, a way of warfare that combined the best of both civilizations. And against this hybrid force, even the mighty Vex were beginning to falter. The counterattack had begun, and there would be no stopping it now. The Vex home system blazed with weapons fire as the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history moved into position. General Seong Min Ryu stood at the command center of the massive Alliance flagship, Victory's Dawn, watching as thousands of ships took their seemingly random positions around the system's central star. The Vex home fleet waited in their characteristic perfect formation, a geometric pattern that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so predictable. Their last line of defense, protecting their homeworld, and its vast network of computer cores that coordinated their entire civilization. All battle groups report ready, Seong Min's tactical officer announced. The Vex are scanning us, but their algorithms can't determine our attack pattern. Seong Min smiled grimly. That's because there isn't one. Begin Operation Final Storm. The battle began with complete silence. Every Alliance ship shut down their main systems simultaneously, appearing to suffer a massive system failure. The Vex, their sensors detecting this apparent vulnerability, began to advance in perfect attack formations. That's when the first trap was sprung. Hidden behind the system's gas giant, Earth's contribution to the fleet emerged. Ships equipped with modified versions of ancient nuclear weapons. Not for destruction, but for their electromagnetic pulses. The detonations created a web of energy disruption that threw the Vex battle computers into confusion. Phase 2, Seong Min ordered. Show them everything we've learned. The combined fleet burst into action. Some ships used old Earth submarine tactics, hiding in the solar plasma streams. Others employed Alliance technology in ways its creators had never imagined, using gravitational slingshots to achieve impossible attack angles. Each battle group fought differently, using tactics that ranged from ancient to ultra-modern. The Vex tried to adapt, but their entire warfare doctrine was based on finding patterns and countering them. Against an enemy that refused to show any patterns, their sophisticated battle computers began to fail. The more they tried to analyze the chaos, the more their perfect formations broke down. On the bridge of the command ship, Admiral Daeho Park watched alongside Council Member Hae-Nul Kim. Their faces reflected the flashes of battle as human ingenuity combined with Alliance technology to create something entirely new. "Look at how they're fighting," Hae-Nul said softly. "No logic, no pattern, yet every move has a purpose. We thought they were primitive because they still used physical weapons and armor. We didn't understand that they had mastered the art of war itself." The battle raged for hours. The Vex, for the first time fighting in their home system, found themselves facing tactics they had never encountered. Earth ships deliberately flew into their firing solutions, taking hits on reinforced armor to open paths for Alliance weapons. Alliance vessels used their advanced technology in ways that defied their own operational parameters. "Their main computer core is exposed," Seong-min announced. "All groups, execute final strike." What followed was a masterpiece of coordinated chaos. Each battle group attacked differently, some using direct assault, others employing deception and feints. The Vex, unable to predict where the real threat would come from, couldn't coordinate their defenses effectively. The massive Vex flagship, a crystalline structure larger than an Earth city, finally raised surrender signals as its computer core went dark. Around it, the remaining Vex fleet, cut off from their central coordination network, began powering down their weapons. "Victory confirmed," Seong-min's tactical officer reported, his voice thick with emotion. "The Vex home fleet is surrendering. Their primary computer network has been isolated. The war is over." On the command bridge, humans and Alliance members stood together, watching as surrender signals spread through the Vex fleet. After centuries of seeming invincible, the perfect logic of the Vex had fallen to human unpredictability combined with Alliance technology. "We thought they were primitive," Hae-Nul repeated, looking at the human officers around her. "We were wrong. They weren't primitive. They were experienced. They knew war in ways we never could." Admiral Park nodded. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The Vex forgot something that humans never could. War isn't about perfection. It's about adaptation, about doing the unexpected, about turning weakness into strength." As the combined fleets secured their historic victory, Seong-min reflected on how this impossible achievement had come about. The Alliance had sought help from a primitive species, only to discover that what they saw as primitive was actually experience in its purest form. The war was over. The galaxy would never be the same. And perhaps, Seong-min thought as he watched humans and Alliance members celebrating together, that was the greatest victory of all.